I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The League of Women Voters has been a nonpartisan, activist, grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. Over the last century, we've fought for election protection, reforms to maintain a democracy, and equal access to the ballot, all while maintaining our commitment to nonpartisanship and fostering an informed electorate. The League does not support any candidate. Our role is to offer the public a chance to learn more about each candidate, empowering them before they go to the polls, and to learn more about what legislature has put on your ballot, as in the 3 amendments that will be you're going to be asked to vote upon. This event is being recorded and will be posted on the League's YouTube channel, Space Coast League of Women Voters. Recordings of this event may not be used without the express written approval of the League. The League will only allow audio-video of the event to be broadcast in its entirety. No editing, altering, or excerpts, except by verified media reporting on the event. There will be time for a Q&A after the presentation. You can write down your questions on the back of your surveys as you think about them. Today, we are so happy to welcome Dana Blickley, our Brevard County property appraiser. Dana Blickley was raised in Jacksonville, Florida, and moved to Brevard County in 1985. She attended Brevard Community College, Eastern Florida State College now, and the University of Central Florida, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Public Administration. Dana is married to her husband, Brian, and they have 3 children, Jessica and Jared, and daughter-in-law, Rebecca. As the daughter of a Marine, Semper Fidelis, was more than a slogan in her home, it was a way of life. Dana is very involved in local and state veteran advocacy. She serves on the board of directors for the National Veterans Homeless Support. NVHS is an organization that strives to eliminate homelessness among our veterans in Central Florida. Before election to office, Dana worked for the Brevard County property appraiser for over 20 years. Dana was elected as Brevard County property appraiser after knocking on over 21,000 doors in Brevard County. She canvassed the entire county by bicycle over a period of 54 and a half weeks. Dana was elected property appraiser in 2012 and re-elected subsequently without opposition in 2016, 2020, and 2024. She works diligently to be one of Florida's leaders in providing customers with the most trusted source of property data, exemption information, and innovative valuation services. So let's welcome Dana Blickley.
Thank you. So welcome. Just some ground rules for the presentation. All of the softball questions and everything that the property appraiser's office is doing right, I will be fielding those. For everything that you felt could have improved or was a negative experience, you can talk to the assistant property appraiser. So he is here for a beating if we want to give it to him. All right, let's get right into this. Let me first let everybody know that there's no questions off limit, okay? I want you to know that straight up. And as formal as this is with your beautiful faces, I would like this to be an informal conversation, and I'd like to be able to provide you as much information as I possibly can. Now, here's what I cannot legally do. I cannot legally tell you you should vote for Amendment 3 or you shouldn't vote for Amendment 3. But I can give you some very substantive information about this amendment and currently what it does and does not do. And there are some things that are going to be left to an implementing bill. And I know this group probably understands that more than some others. So there are some implementation things that would come if the voters pass this amendment. There would be some implementing legislation that would clarify some things that aren't yet determined. And I'll talk about those when I get there. And I hate having my back to you. And I'm going the wrong way because I have the clicker in my hand. Am I going up or down? There we go. No, because then I won't know where I am. Okay. So first, just a notice, Florida's property appraisers, there's 67 of us. There's 67 tax collectors around the state. Oh, I think this is set to go forward. Damien, can you pull this up and make sure there's no transition time on the computer? I think it's automatically advancing. If you go over to transitions. Yeah, it's here. Yeah, just one mouse click. Yeah. Well, click on mouse click. Oh, okay. It helps that the assistant property appraiser is also an IT guy. All right, let's see. Now, there we go. Okay. So first is just a disclaimer, and I'm probably going to walk to the back of the room since I do have this, so I don't have my back to the screen, and I don't have my back to you because that bothers me. Is it still advancing?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh dear.
Okay, I'll just keep taking it backwards if that's what I have to do. So just understand that as property appraisers as a group, as tax collectors as a group, we do not endorse any particular ballot measure or constitutional amendment, and that this presentation is just for information only. Wrong way. Okay. So let's get right into what Amendment 3 does. Amendment 3 does three major things. The first one is that it increases your homestead exemption for qualifying properties. This is going to be fun. It is reducing the assessment limitation for non-homesteaded properties, and it establishes some residency-based provisions for certain homestead benefits. Now I'm going to advance the slide and then see if Damien can go up there and work on having that stop because it's irritating me. So let's talk about a couple of things. Amendment 3 will be on your ballot, your general election ballot on November the 3rd, and it takes 60% of the voters in the state of Florida to pass an amendment to our Constitution. Now, I will tell you, as history goes, there's only been one amendment on our Constitution that involved increasing any type of exemption amounts that has failed in a very long time. And I don't know if you guys remember that amendment. I don't exactly remember the number, but I can tell you that it was an amendment that increased homestead exemption for certain professions. But then it got really mired down into, and I'll give you just one example for the teachers in the room. So if you were a classroom teacher, you qualified for the additional exemption, but if you were a guidance counselor, you didn't qualify for the exemption. So the voters rejected that. They didn't like, I would assume, the carve out in trying to figure out, do I even qualify for that? Then there's the change from year to year. And how would the property appraiser know that today I qualify because I am a classroom teacher, but I decided I'm going to go into the administration or the counseling area that may even be an upward movement in my career, but now I don't qualify for an additional homestead exemption. So you guys decided, itch nay, not going to approve that one. It did not make the 60% and that failed. But all other amendments to our Constitution that have involved increasing homestead exemptions have generally passed favorably by the electorate. Think we're there? So let's see. I think we might be there. Okay. So again, we talked about that takes 60%. You will see that on your ballot in November. Okay, if the voters were to approve the amendment, It would take effect January 1, 2027. And the first year that it would be reflected on your notice of proposed property taxes, which by the way are going out Tuesday, and on your tax bills would be in November of 2027. Okay. The way that Amendment 3 is written as a proposed law change is not equal amongst all property owners. And that is different from the way property tax exemptions for homestead work right now. Right now, homestead exemptions are based on your residency documents, and you qualify your property by proving that you own a home, that you register your vehicles here, that you file your income taxes here, that you have a Florida driver's license, and those types of things. And once you qualify, it's the same for every property owner, albeit based on the value of the property, because if you don't have a certain amount of assessed value, you may not qualify for all of the second exemption, but it is applied equally to all property owners. Amendment 3 changes that a bit, so it does different things because of the different residency requirements. So we're going to take probably the largest, and for you math folks, this is probably about 2 standard deviations from the mean for all folks that have homestead now. So recent homesteaders or first-time homesteaders. So the larger, and we'll get into the amounts in a minute, the larger homestead exemption would reduce future non-school property taxes. Recent buyers that bought as of January 1 and those that exist now that have homestead exemption would be eligible for the higher amounts. For the first year, that is proposed to be $150,000. For the second year, that would go to $250,000. Okay, that would be first time and recent homesteaders. Now, the caveat to that is that you would have to own and occupy as of January 1, 2027. So there's been a lot of speculation about the first lineup there being a proactive change that would encourage folks to claim Florida as their homestead exemption. And the second is that 2 standard deviations I was talking about. That's most of us. We're existing homestead owners. That would basically say that our homestead exemption would go from right now, which is a little over $50,000 to $150,000, and then subsequently to $250,000. Now, the first $25,000 is for all taxing authorities, including school. So any addition beyond that, as it is now and as it would not be applied to school. Okay, so that's, and there's a slide on that in the future. For new Florida residents that decided they were going to make Florida their home, after January 1, they would not qualify for the full amount. They would qualify for a $50,000 exemption per year until they reached whatever the max was in that period of time. And that's the part that gets a little bit fuzzy in determining whether or not somebody would qualify. What is also very confusing about this is, what if you're not a new Florida resident, so you've been in Florida for quite some time, but you haven't owned a home? Would you qualify for those? And we'll get to that in a minute as well. For fully exempt property owners, and I will use my heroes that have fought for this country and fought for those of us, including up to writing a check for their lives, this would make no change for them. Because if they're already exempt, that means they pay no ad valorem property taxes. So whether or not amendment passes or fails would make no difference in terms of their property tax liabilities. For non-homesteaded residential and commercial properties, this amendment proposes that the assessment cap that is currently set at 10% be reduced to 5%. So right now, if you own, let's say you own a second home that you rent out, or you own commercial property or industrial property, that property right now, if the market value goes up 15% from one year to the next, the assessed value can only go up 10%. So in that scenario, that would reduce that 10 to 5. Okay. And at the bottom, it says the proposed homestead exemption and assessment limitation changes affect taxable value, not tax rate. It's very important for everyone to understand that this amendment specifically affects taxable value and assessed value. It does not ensure that the tax liability will be less. Okay, there's two parts to a property tax equation: taxable value and tax rate. This only addresses taxable value. Okay. Currently, the homestead amounts are $25,000. So everyone that has homestead exemption has $25,000 taken off of the assessed value, and that exempts $25,000 off of every taxing authority, including schools. The second homestead exemption, because if you remember, you voted on whether or not that amount should be factored by the CPI and continue to go up, and that was positive, that did change. That amount for this year was $26,411. So if you qualified for the full amount, your homestead exemption this year was $51,411. Okay, kind of different than what we've seen in the past. And this is the second year, tax year, that we have factored that second homestead exemption. Okay. So this question is, what changes are proposed for homesteaded property? Okay, so I've got a few bullet points. So it's a $25,000 that still applies to all millages, up to $150,000 homestead exemption beginning January 1, 2027, but not applied to school millages, up to $250,000 homestead exemption beginning January 1, 2028, albeit it would exclude school millages. And then an annual CPI adjustment to the maximum homestead exemption beginning January 1, 2029. So remember that second 25 that's now 26,411, okay? Once you get to 250, the first 25 would apply to everything. The remaining 225 would be factored with the CPI every year. So you would continue to see the 250 go up as we had a change in the consumer price index, as we currently do with homestead exemption now. Okay. And I've got a note at the bottom: residential property owners who are permanent resident Florida residents as of December 31st, 2026 would be eligible for the new larger homestead amount beginning 2027. Nothing would be required on your part if you have an existing homestead exemption and you make no changes to the title of your property that affects your exemption, and this were to pass, the property appraiser would automatically increase those homestead amounts for you. So it doesn't require anything to be done by the property owner. Okay. What if I'm a Florida resident by December 31st, 2026, but I haven't purchased a home yet? The answer to that question is those that establish Florida residency by December 31st, 2026 would be eligible for the new larger amount when they do choose to purchase residential property and apply for the homestead exemption. Now, that's one of the things that is going to be included in the implementing bill, because the legislature is going to have to decide what documentation that the property appraiser is going to be able to accept to prove that you're a Florida resident. Okay, that's going to get a little tricky. They don't really care what the property appraiser thinks about that. They've done it before. It just gets tricky. Okay, so what if you become a Florida resident on January 1, 2027 or after? Okay, this amendment provides a different homestead structure for individuals who become Florida residents on or after January 1, 2027. Under the current proposal, on or after January 1, 2027, you would begin to receive a homestead exemption of $50,000. That would be adjusted annually until you reach the 5 years and reach the max. Okay. I know that gets a little bit confusing, but that's how that would work. After maintaining a Florida homestead exemption for 4 years, the property owner would then become eligible for the new larger amount beginning the 5th year. Okay. And additional administrative procedures will be established for the implementing legislation. Okay. Can I move to Florida in 2027 and immediately receive the 150 or the 250 homestead exemption? Short answer is no. I won't read that to you again. We've gone over how the different timings of when you become a Florida resident would affect your eligible homestead amounts. Okay. Would the proposed homestead exemption apply to school taxes? We've kind of covered that. Short answer is no. Only the first $25,000 exemption, as established by the Constitution, exempts all property owners from paying any taxes, no matter who the taxing authority is. Would every homestead property receive the same tax savings? No, it would not. Potential tax savings vary on many factors, and I've listed those for you there. Depending upon what your assessed value is, depending upon what your taxable is, we're not all equally yoked in terms of what exemptions we qualify and receive. For instance, if you are a veteran and you have a 10% disability rating from the Department of Veteran Affairs, up to 100%, but not total and permanent, your assessed value, your taxable value is going to be $5,000 less than somebody that doesn't, because that's an additional $5,000 on top of your homestead exemption. So people have different assessed values. They're going to have different taxable values, different existing exemptions that they may already have that they would just continue to, that would be continuous, that wouldn't be affected. Depending upon how long you've had homestead exemption, remember here in Florida we have assessment caps. I know you guys realize you can live right next door to your neighbor, have the same exact house, but if you've had homestead for 10 years and your neighbor's only had a homestead for 2 years, you see a big difference in what your tax liability is. And that is because of that assessment cap that exists for Florida residents. Also, not all local millages are the same. You guys know this. If you live in the city of Titusville, you're going to have a different tax rate than if you lived in the unincorporated area of North Brevard. Same as if you live in a municipality in South versus a different municipality. So everyone's tax savings would depend on what the taxing authorities established for their millage rates. Can the property appraiser or tax collector calculate my exact savings today? Absolutely not. And there are some property appraisers around the state that have put out some calculators. There's only a few that have put out some potential savings for property owners, but there's a lot of assumptions in there. And to be honest with you, I kind of feel it's a bit disingenuous, because I can tell you that if you have the same exact millage rate as you do right now, and this passes, I could tell you what the net change in your taxes would be. But that's assuming that the taxing authority doesn't adjust the millage. Okay, and that's a bad assumption. And that's a huge assumption on my part. So I will not be putting any type of calculator on my website. Now, what we do have on the website that Damien made sure is there for you is you can go on the website and estimate your property taxes right now, and you can choose to put in different amounts. So you could do roundabout kind of an estimate if you wanted to play around with that. The problem is you have no way of knowing what your millage rates are going to be for any taxing authority. Okay? But if you'd like to do that, it is certainly a tool that's there for you. Okay. Does this amendment stop at $250,000? Is that the cap? Well, we kind of covered that earlier, and the short answer is no, because that figure is going to be factored by the Consumer Price Index each year once it reaches the 250. Okay. One of the questions that you guys sent over for the property appraiser was, how is property appraised in Florida? So here's the answer. So Florida property is appraised annually as of January 1st. A lot of people don't realize that the property appraiser reappraises your property every year, no matter what you do. Whether you add somebody to the title, Rather you don't make any changes at all. Certainly if you build a pool, we will come. Those types of things, but all properties are assessed every year. Florida law requires that. So every January 1, we assess your property. Now the legal assessment date is January 1, so anything that happens after January 1 cannot be considered by the property appraiser for the current tax year. So I'll give you a couple of examples of that. If you had an existing home and you built a pool, and you finished your pool in February, you would not pay taxes on that pool until the following year because it was not complete as of January the 1st. Now that sounds like a good deal. I'm going to give you the converse of that, okay? If your home burns down on January the 10th, you have to pay property taxes on improved property with your home because as of January 1, that existed. And so when I talk about that, people always ask me, well, why doesn't that change? Well, the short answer it is, pick a date. You could pick June, and you could say, as of June the 1st, that's going to be the legal assessment date. But that means if your house burns down June the 2nd, for that cycle, you'd have to pay. So it really doesn't matter where you move the date, the same would apply. But what's really important, and the reason that the January 1 date exists there is because, contrary to popular belief, the property appraiser doesn't decide what properties should appraise for. You guys do that. You go into the marketplace and you transact property and you list your properties and you negotiate as buyers and sellers and you come up with a sale price for that property. Now, I have to take that information and I do 3 approaches to value like any other appraiser, and I have to glean all of that information out of the market and make sure that when I come to value conclusions for each property, that they're representative of the market. All right? So a lot of people think, well, the property appraiser gets to make that decision. And the property appraiser must know how to do her job and must understand all 3 approaches to value, and they're listed there: a market approach, a cost approach, and an income approach. She has to understand which approaches are more appropriate for different types of property. An example would be commercial property. If you are a commercial property owner, you know that most of the time you are motivated by your return on your investment, right? It's not really so much about the bricks and the mortar, it's really about the location and really about, let me see the books. If I invest in this property, if I purchase it, what's going to be my return on my investment? Those types of properties, we are looking at income streams. What's the income on the property? What are the expenses? And then we take a capitalization rate and we come up with a value based on an income stream. With residential property, it doesn't work that way. When you guys are transacting residential property, it's based on location, where you want to live, what the school district is, whether your wife walked into that house and said, this is it, we're buying this, I love the kitchen, that's it, okay? So we're motivated very differently. So what the property appraiser must do is all 3 approaches, and she must consider all 3 approaches when coming to a value conclusion. Okay, here is some other information you guys asked. You kind of wanted to know how much property is exempt, how much does before you remove the immune properties and exempt properties, what does that end up being at the end of the day in terms of taxable value? So in Brevard County, approximately 43% of property in Brevard County is either immune or exempt from taxation. So that would include the spaceport, all of the properties that are immune that the federal government or municipal or local governments may own. It also includes all of the property that is exempt as a result of you filing for different exemptions, okay? So if the total value of the Brevard County was $100, 43% of that's going to be written off in terms of taxable. So to give you some harder numbers, I think you guys also asked how many properties in Brevard County have homestead exemption. Well, out of 350,721, boy, it's a struggle I'm doing for myself back here. Out of the total number of parcels, approximately 173,000 of those have homestead exemption. So almost half of every property owned in Brevard County has a permanent Florida resident filing for homestead exemption. Okay? So 2026, even though we're in that year, we haven't finalized right now. What we've done is we have preliminary values. If you go to our website and you pull up your house, you do have your proposed value for 2026 that will appear on your tax bill. But what we don't have is we don't have the final levies yet. That comes in the month of September, and then that is extended and sent to you as a tax bill. So the last certified tax roll we have is 2026 or 2025, and in 2025 we had $127.7 billion of market value. So that's what I appraised the entire county of before any exemptions. And once we remove the immune properties and all of the exemptions, the total taxable value, much different, 73 billion. Okay, so that's how we get the 43%. If you want to check the math, you math majors in here, that's how we get to that portion of property. Okay, I'm gonna have to move up because there's no way I can see this. This is actually information, it's public information. It's available on the Florida Department of Revenue's website, and I've got the little icon there for you to see. So you could go to the Florida Department of Revenue's website, click on the property tax tab, and all of the information that you see here is available for every county in the state of Florida. They do a really nice job. They're called county profiles. And I've just put some of the profile information that I thought you guys might find interesting. I wonder if there's a, does it work? Looks like it works, but I don't think it works. Okay, so this is basically a pie chart broken down by real estate properties by property type. So I know you can't see this here, but this big 74.4%, that's single family residential property. The 14.4 is vacant residential, and so on. This is that same property by just value. So you can see that 74, just about the same percentage of parcel count make up total value. So that's pretty interesting if you're into math and pie charts there. This is information about our county values, okay? Total just value, how much is stricken off by limitations and classifications, the total school value, total value of exemptions, school taxable as a percentage of just, prior year school taxable value, and what percentage changes. And then this side gives you some other information. So it's there. This is also on property taxes levied. So it gives you some categorical information on total county taxes, school, municipal, other ad valorem, and total, and then gives you a change from the year. So it's very good information to have, particularly for property owners that are thinking about whether or not they want to make Florida their primary residence. They can kind of look at these county profiles, and I'm sure when they do, they figure out that Brevard is the best, because that's what you can ascertain once you review that information. Okay, some important dates. I would be remiss in my job if I didn't mention these everywhere I go. We talked about January 1 being the legal date of assessment. We talked about why. March 1st is the deadline for you to file any type of exemption. Now, for those folks that qualify for the limited income senior exemption, you have a little bit later until May the 1st to get us your income information, but you have to file for the exemption by March the 1st. So just always keep March the 1st in your mind in terms of filing for any exemptions. So if you've had a homestead exemption for a long time, but you now decide you're going to make some estate planning changes, maybe you're going to put your property into a trust, you have to refile your exemption by March the 1st, okay? April 1st deadline, that's a tangible personal property return back to the property appraiser. So if you own a business and you receive a tangible personal property return and you have not filed for an exemption or filed initially, that is your deadline to file your tangible personal property tax return with our office. Mid-August is when the notice of proposed property taxes go out. I am mailing those on behalf of all taxing authorities Tuesday on the 18th. You may see a PDF of your trim notice on our website before you actually receive it in the mail. Damien's pretty good about getting those loaded, so you don't have to wait on the mailman to bring you that notice. You can go right to our website and pull it up. In September, 25 days following the mailing of the notice of proposed property taxes is the deadline for you to file a petition to the Value Adjustment Board. And I want to talk a little bit about that. The Value Adjustment Board is a quasi-judicial board where property owners can go for a minimal expense if they disagree with the property appraiser. And I don't get my feelings hurt when you disagree with me. Many times you guys have information about your properties that I don't have. I'll give you an example. You've got some foundation issues. Maybe you've got a property that is sinking on one side. You cannot see that from the outside. Most of you are not calling Damien and I and saying, hey, come into my home, I want to show you something. You don't think about that until we send you a notice of proposed property taxes or your tax bill, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm getting ready to have to pay $25,000 to pump my house up and put some cement in there. Property appraiser doesn't know this. You have 25 days to have an informal conference with a property appraiser, let them know this information, or if we can't come to a meeting of the minds on a value, you have those 25 days to file a petition to the Value Adjustment Board. Now, 350,000 of you, 106 of us, okay? So if you've reached out to us and you've given us some information and we have not completed the analyzation, file the petition so you secure your administrative right of appeal. And then if we can get to that before a hearing and come to a meeting of the mind, you can always withdraw the petition. So I'm a property rights girl. I always want you to protect your right of appeal. And again, you outnumber me in droves. So we review all of them. It's just that, obviously we can't get them all reviewed before the deadline. Okay? So just make sure that you do that. It doesn't have to be an adversarial process. Our salaries, our budget are not dependent upon the value of your property. Okay? If I reduce your property or I increase your property value from one year to the next, it makes no difference in what the Department of Revenue says is appropriate for me to run the office. Okay? That please know there's no incentive to overappraise, there's no incentive to underappraise. Okay?
Dan,
Yes, sir.
There's a hard deadline to apply to the VAB, but what about exemptions?
Exemptions are done. Great question, Damien. So exemptions, if you apply for an exemption and we deny you, the law requires that we notice you by certified mail. It's $10 a pop that we pay. Not happy about that. Postmaster doesn't care that I'm not happy about that. But I have to pay $10, and the idea is to make sure that you receive that, and you have 30 days to file a petition for those, for the denial of exemptions. For a late file exemption, you have the regular deadline. But if we deny, and we send you a denial, and in the denial we will tell you you have 30 days to file a petition if you disagree. Okay? If we deny an exemption, it's one of two reasons. One is you don't qualify, and it happens. People don't realize that they can't have homestead exemption but still vote in Minnesota and register their cars in Minnesota. Just a lot of people don't realize that. It may be the first time that they've ever filed for a residency-based exemption. So we have to deny those. The other predominant reason is because you have made an application with incomplete data. So maybe you've come in and you've applied and you did change your address on your voter's card, but you didn't change it on your driver's license. You hadn't gotten around to change it on your vehicle registration. We're not going to be able to approve that until your residency documentation overwhelmingly says that you're a Florida resident. So most of the time, that's the reason for exemptions. We don't look for ways to not approve exemptions. We look for ways to approve exemptions. Okay? We just can't violate the law to do it. We love you, but I'm not going to jail for it. I'm not made that way. Right? November 1st. My good friend Lisa Cullen, who is so sorry she couldn't be here today. She had a family emergency, or she would have been here, I promise you. She's going to send you a love letter on November the 1st. Okay? Now, she's a great tax collector. She generally gets those puppies out before November 1st on the website. And you do not have to wait until you get a piece of mail from her. Just like the trim notices, all tax bills are posted on the website as well. So generally she'll have those out, last week in October, usually before Halloween. They'll be out there. But she does mail them on November the 1st. Okay? Again, these are just some other information that I pulled out there that kind of gives you an example of how the Florida property tax system works. You start out with the appraised value, which is synonymous with market value, and then we remove any assessment cap we talked about. So once you file homestead in the state of Florida, your homesteaded property is capped at 3% or the CPI, whichever is less. Your non-homesteaded property is capped at 10% from 1 year to the next, so long as you make no changes to the title of your property. Then so your market value minus whatever that cap is gets you to the assessed value, and then the exemptions are removed from your assessed value to come to your taxable value. Okay, this is a little dated because we now know the 25 is factored up, but just for math purposes, that's how the property tax equation works. Taxable value is what is applied to tax rates to determine how much you'll have to reach into your pocket for. Okay, it's taxable value. And then this on the right side, I will tell you because I've worked with Lisa Dawn Colon for 36 years. Go ahead and do the math. Okay. All right. I know you're not going to believe if I tell you that I got elected property appraiser when I was 12. Either. We've been working together a very long time. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights are very important to us. And I will tell you that we've had some uncomfortable conversations with taxing authorities over those Bill of Rights. Okay? You send us something, send the tax collector something, and you want them to collect on your behalf as a taxing authority, but it's not a legal levy, she's going to say no. That's how that happens. So just to understand, those are very, very important to us. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights and the Property Rights Bill of Rights are posted on our websites. You should be familiar with what those rights are, and you should be staunch about them. Okay? Okay. Happy birthday, America. It's been an exciting year to celebrate 250 years. I tend to have a lot of red, white, and blue in my wardrobe, so it wasn't a big change for me. I would imagine League of Women Voters probably have a little red, white, and blue in their wardrobes as well. Thank you so much for having us here today. We are absolutely going to open up the floor to take your questions. If it's a question that I can't legally answer for you, I'm going to tell you that I can't, and I'm going to tell you why. Or if it is a question that requires me to have osmosis, I'm going to tell you that. But I don't want there to be any question off limits to you. I'm here for as long as your moderators have allotted us to be. And other than that, okay. How about we'll start here and work our way there to make it fair, okay? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Can you explain what our property taxes are used for locally?
So her question is, can you tell us what property taxes are used for locally? Is this hooked to the internet? So can I pull up a website here? It is not, okay. So the easy answer to that is look at your tax bill. Your tax bill has every taxing authority that is in your pocket, in your respective pocket, right? Because this beautiful lady that may live in Titusville is going to have a completely different tax bill than this young lady that lives in the unincorporated area of District 4, right? They're going to have very different. But Taxpayer Bill of Rights says every single person that is in your pocket has to be listed on a notice of proposed property taxes and on the tax bill, and those amounts have to be listed. Not only do they have to be listed, they have to be listed on a trim notice to tell you what the rate was last year, what the proposed rate is going to be, and what the rate would be if the taxing authority made no budget change. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, except for the general fund, right? The general fund that you see at the top of every tax bill, okay, is almost the only fund that doesn't have restrictions, meaning that so long as it would be a legal expenditure for a taxing authority, general fund, they can use discretion on that, okay? So things like library district has to be used to support libraries. Law enforcement MSTU has to be used for road deputies. School taxes have to go to Brevard Public Schools. So most of them are self-explanatory. But if I've said it once, I will have said this 2,472 times this year. On the back of your notice of proposed property taxes, there is a list of every budget meeting, time and place and phone number that is going to happen this year respective to your property. So if the taxing authority is on one side of your notice of proposed property taxes, that meeting information is on the other side to tell you exactly where that meeting is going to take place, the time, location, and a phone number. The only way you are ever going to know exactly what those funds are being used for is, one, to read the budget, which is a very, very long document, which I do every year, and I would encourage you to do. And the other way is for you to show up to those meetings and ask those questions, particularly if you see changes from one year to the next. You see a major change from one year to the next is an appropriate question to walk up to that dais and say, my name is Daniel Blickley, I'm a property owner in District 4, and I noticed that my general fund revenue went from $417 to now $1,200. I'd like to know why, okay? They have a responsibility to answer those questions, and that is the time that you can pull a card and speak your mind and ask those questions. Now, most of the time, because of time restraints, taxing authorities won't answer your questions while you're up at the dais, but a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take your questions and have staff answer them, once you've spoken, okay? Are you okay with that, or do you have another follow-up?
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
There was a gentleman. Yes, sir.
Yes, this might not be a you question, but I'll try anyway.
Okay.
It's my understanding that the amendment puts some restrictions on the county governments as to how they might replace those funds. So it's not just as simple as increasing the millage rates and the county's broken even. They've got some sort of handcuffs on them. Could you speak a bit about what those might look like and what the county government might be forced to do from an alternative perspective?
Sure. Some of it, yes. Some of it is going to be left to the implementation bill. So, did you hear what his question is? His question is, are there any things within this legislation that would limit or take discretion away from local taxing authorities and decide how much they can increase taxes and to what extent, and what they can use ad valorem taxes for? Am I rephrasing your question correctly? Okay. So, it's kind of a three-part question, so I'm going to attempt to answer it as best that I can. Some of that is going to be up to the implementing language. But here's what the legislature did do. The first thing they did this year that did not require our approval, they limited the amount of revenue that taxing authorities could increase with certain thresholds requiring a certain amount of votes for that taxing authority. So I'll give you an example. Prior to June 24th, 2026, taxing authorities could take the revenue that they collected last year. So in this case, we're going to use $100. Let's say after they sent out all the tax bills, they collected $100 in ad valorem tax revenues. When they are at their starting point the next year, the law used to say, you start with your $100, you can factor that up by the CPI, whatever that was, and if you adopt a rate that represents that, that is not a tax increase. You're allowed to do that and not have to publish that as a tax increase. So it gave taxing authorities a way to handle inflation, if you will, okay? What the legislature did this year is said, you are no longer gonna be able to use that inflationary percentage. If you collected $100 last year, the rollback rate, which is what we call that rate, you cannot factor by the CPI. You start at $100. If you want to collect $103, you have to publish that as a tax increase, and up to $110, that would be 10%, it requires a 2/3 vote. Prior to that, it was a simple majority. So in our case, with 5, it only took 3. If you wanted to go 10%, it took 2/3, or 4 votes. If you wanted to exceed 10% of the previous year, 110, it took a unanimous vote. So that is something that the legislature has already done. Okay, that was done, didn't require our approval. What this implementing bill does in the language is it talks about what core services are and what ad valorem taxes can be spent on. Okay, and it lists those. However, there's a sentence at the end that kind of says, and kind of anything else that's determined by the local tax authority be a core service. Okay, I'll let you opine on that. But right now, that's how the legislation currently is written. The other thing that this language does not do, it does not prevent taxing authorities from rolling up their millages to collect the same amount of money as they did the prior year. Okay? That is why Dana will not put a calculator on her website, because I would probably have to fight with Damien if I said, Damien, I thought that would be a good idea. Because the county commission may choose to do something totally different than the city of Satellite Beach. And if you are a property owner in the city of Satellite Beach, you're going to pay the general fund, mosquito control, Brevard Library, but you're also going to have those municipal rates on there. Maybe Satellite Beach says, hey guys, we need to tighten our belts. There's just some things we're going to have to do different. Maybe we're not going to pick up trash twice a week. Maybe we're going to limit that service to once a week and have that as cost savings. Maybe the county commission is going to say, nope, our customers want twice a week. We're going to continue to fund that at that level, and as a result, we're going to increase the rate. Okay? So there's no way for me to tell you exactly what that total impact is going to do until we see if it passes and we see what the response of each taxing authority is going to be. Great question for your taxing authorities. Okay, great question. But they are the only ones that can answer that. And to be fair, they really can't answer that until they see what this does. Now, having said that, you know, if you're in one of those seats, you should be thinking about this already. You should be thinking about what the potential impacts would be. I have provided every taxing district in Brevard County an estimate of what this would look like if it were in effect for 2026. I've already told them, if it were in effect for 2026, at the rates you have now, this would be the impact to your taxable value. So they have that information already. How they choose to implement that, if this were to pass, is going to be up to each individual board. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Number one, I want to thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Those of us in the league, when we table, people are very confused about taxes, rightfully so. Having done research on many of the bills that come through, education bills, there's not a lot of thought given to the bills that are written. And all I'm thinking is about how many people you have working for you now with the new parameters going on. And are you going to be able to hire more staff with just this change, plus the fact that we have a lot of growth in Brevard County? We have, we're building all over the place. That's the only thing that was just going through my mind, is that you poor guys, I mean, will you be able to hire more staff if this amendment goes through?
So like a true politician, I'm gonna find a way to brag with that question. So, and this is true. In 2006, I was not the property appraiser then, but I worked in the property appraiser's office. In 2006, the budget for the property appraiser's office was $12,007,000 and some change. In 2026, for the 2026-2027 budget request, my budget request was $12,500,000 and some change. So in 20 years, my budget is 4 point, for you math people, about 4.7, if I did that right, about 4.7% higher than it was 20 years ago. The only way that you accomplish that is to be transformative. And we have done that. And I'm going to brag on the Damians and all of the people that work in our office. You have to get better at what you do, and you have to get more efficient. And we have been able to do that through a lot of the tools that we use. The biggest one is our CAMA system, our computer system. It's called a CAMA, Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal System. So this technology is way, way, way better, way better than it was 20 years ago. And we can appraise more properties more accurately with less appraisers as a result of that, okay? We also went through every policy and procedure by department in our office to find out if we had a duplication of services anywhere. And we found by doing that, and by also unifying and making our documentation for each career within our office, whether it was customer service, whether it was GIS, whether it was some of the IT people that work for Damien, we looked at all of that and found that we were doing things because we'd always done them. And it seemed like that's what we were supposed to do. And we found that we were spending a lot of times annotating stuff on maps, thinking that the appraisers needed that when they didn't. Like, I don't know why you're taking all that time drawing that on the maps. With our new tool, we don't need that. We have a much better way of getting that information. So the only way you do something like that, number one, is to have great people. And man, we have great people working for you in the property appraiser's office. But the other thing is you have to do something different, right? You cannot do what you've always been doing, even if it's been working for you, and be transformative. And I'm a taxpayer, okay? And I like having cars that run and, you know, quality employees, and I do salary studies every 60 months to make sure that my salaries are in market, okay? But I'm a taxpayer, right? And I like to keep as much disposable income in my pocket as I can. So I don't play that on TV. I actually feel that way. So the answer is yes. If this passes, the biggest change for us, well, Damien's going to handle most of it, right? He's going to go to the computer system. He's going to change the amounts, and I know it sounds easy, and it's not quite that easy, but he's going to take that second 25 to 150, and then it's going to change in the following year to 250, and it's going to be factored each year, just like just like he handled the changes on the exemption amounts now. Probably what would happen is we probably would have to hire one, maybe two more analysts, because we got to now figure out if you were a Florida resident for 5 years, if you hadn't had homestead, to figure out. So I'm going to pick on this beautiful lady here because she's beautiful and I love purple. And she's going to say, well, Dana, I've been a Florida resident for 9 years. And I'm going to say, but she doesn't own a home, hasn't owned a home, hasn't had a homestead. And she's going to say, well, I've been renting this apartment for 3 years. And I'm going to say, okay, I need a copy of your lease. And then where were you prior to that? Well, prior to that, because I'm so young, I lived with my mom because I was in college. Okay, what is the legislature going to say about that? Am I going to be able to get an affidavit? You know, or are you going to be able to just self-report? Those are the types of things that are going to be a bit laborious for us. That is going to require extra services. But the sky is not falling. I've been through many, many legislative changes in the 40 years that I've been doing this job. And we will succumb to whatever happens, and we will be successful at it. So the biggest part, our tools will handle with our IT staff. The other part, yes, that's going to be a bit laborious. But the same thing happened when we adopted a limited income senior exemption, right? Because Lots of seniors have different types of incomes. Some do not apply to limited income seniors, and our staff has to go through that documentation. So it's going to be similar to that. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, in the presentation I saw where it stated that there were non-school taxes. So would school taxes be affected with this change if it was to be voted for yes?
School taxes are held harmless in this. They've exempted school taxes. The original, everybody remembers when the governor said, I want to eliminate property taxes, right? You own your home, you shouldn't have to pay property taxes. And we know that's not what this is, right? This is not an elimination of property taxes. But even when some of the House Joint Resolutions and the Senate came out and said, we're going to eliminate school taxes from the additional exemptions, okay? So that they would be held harmless there. Where they wouldn't be held harmless is taxable value may go down. There's only two parts to a tax equation, right? 2 times 2 is 4. So in that case, that could be an impact. And let me also say this. Right now, we don't know how many people will be motivated, right, to make Florida their primary residence. And this is not a political statement, no matter where you were on the side of COVID. The fact is, there was a post-pandemic migration to the state of Florida as a result of COVID. People came to Florida. They did. You came here. Previous to COVID, I had about 16 to 1,800 new homestead applications. That went to 23 to 2,600, okay, for 3 straight years. And then it started leveling off. So what we don't know right now is how many folks will be motivated to come to a state that has no state income tax and now an increased homestead exemption with assessment limitations as well. Yes.
In the back. Suzanne
Oh,
has a
I'm
question.
so sorry.
She's been
I'm
doing
going to
this.
this side.
Okay, my
You
question
guys
is-
have been hogging the questions. I'm going.
It keeps changing every time you say something. So I guess my question is basically, how is your office funded? Because it's my impression that across the board, pretty much, the county commission is going to have to reduce the budgets of all the constitutional offices. So how, I'm sure you've reviewed, because you're going to pay attention, how do you anticipate it's going to affect your office if this passes? And how are you going to fix it? You just said you would hire somebody. I would presume you might have to lay people off.
No, ma'am, I will not be laying people off,
That's awesome.
and I'll tell you why. So, 5 constitutional officers, property appraiser, tax collector, clerk of court, supervisor of elections, and sheriff. We all have different funding mechanisms. So I'm gonna just use the tax collector and the property appraiser as an example because you've asked how that would affect us. The property appraiser and the tax collector's budgets are approved by the state of Florida, not by the local county commission. They don't have anything to do with the approval of our budget. And it is written in the Constitution that way for a reason. Think about what it would be like, fox guarding the hen house, if the people that needed the money were also the people that determined what the value was, right? Might have a little funny business there. So the legislature was very clear about that in our state constitution, to keep those constitutional duties separate from those that are taxing authorities. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that constitutional officers are listed in the core services that must be funded, even as a result of this amendment. Now, the reason I will tell you it won't affect my budget is I don't have 106 people on my payroll to do the job of what 84 could do. I don't. When I have a man down, okay, we feel it, right? That is just how I budget. I'm not telling you that every politician or every taxing authority or every constitutional officer budgets that way, but I do, okay? We have the appropriate amount of resources for the appropriate amount of work that we have, based on the size of our county, based on the workload, and based on what an appropriate time off would be for our employees. So, there's a statistical formula for that, X number of sick days, X number of holidays, X number of vacation days, and how that work has to be distributed. So, no ma'am, I won't be cutting my budget because I can't. I don't pick up your trash or pave roads, and I don't get to say, you know what, I'm gonna reduce my budget by 3%, and I'm only gonna take 10,000 new homestead applications this year. Okay? I don't get to do that. And if you're the unlucky 10,001, you're gonna be pretty ticked off at me. So, no, it wouldn't affect my budget or what it costs for me to do business, other than the additional resources for how ugly this documentation may get.
But what about the other constitutional officers? I know, for example, the supervisor of election gets some funding from the county commission because there was a big fight last year about part of that. So would they be affected? Are they funded differently? They're not funded by the state?
So the supervisor of elections has their budget approved by the county commission. The sheriff has their budget approved by the county commission. The clerk of court is the real weirdo. And I love the clerk of court, but she would tell you that she's a weirdo when it comes to funding. Her funding is done two different ways. She has 2 different fiscal years, which is why I'll never be clerk of court. The majority of her money comes from the CCOC, the state. They take up all the revenues that they collect and they disperse them back down. And then the other small portion of her budget that covers the clerk to the board functions for like taking the minutes for the meetings and the value adjustment board, believe it or not, that comes from a general fund transfer. Of her total budget, that's only about $2 million for the clerk of court. So would the sheriff's budget be affected? That remains to be seen. If the county commission would be asking our sheriff to cut his budget, I will tell you that if they made that ask and if the sheriff could not, and this would be any sheriff, all 67, not just our sheriff, if the county commission didn't approve a public safety budget that is a sheriff, the sheriff could petition the state to have that information reviewed. But yes, there could be some potential impacts for those that require approval from the Board of County Commissioners.
I'm sorry, I keep having more questions. So are you saying that if that happened, if they reduced the sheriff's budget and he appealed to the state, that the state could basically order the county commission?
Correct.
To restore? So they
Correct.
wouldn't pay for it, they would say, oh, you gotta pay for it even though we've taken money out of your.
Correct.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's correct. We go over here. You guys are still like 2 ahead.
Would you say that the schools will not be impacted and first responders will not be impacted?
I cannot answer that honestly, that the schools won't be impacted or that first responders won't be impacted. That would be unfair for me to say that. I will say this. If you have less taxable value, generally the response has been a higher tax rate. Overall through time. Okay? Either taxable value has increased and the rate may have decreased, or vice versa. So I can't tell you that the response won't be, yes, we're gonna lose some taxable value, yes, we're gonna get some new folks deciding that they're gonna come to Florida or buy properties here or homestead here, and there's gonna be additional value there, because you know what happens when you sell your house, right? When you sell your house to this beautiful lady, that $300,000 that you weren't paying taxes on because you had that assessment cap, she doesn't have. So your $2,200 tax bill is now gonna be $7,000 for her. So all of that has to be accounted for, or should be accounted for, before a taxing authority says, I'm just gonna raise it.
So they could basically raise rates, the schools and first responders.
Yes, ma'am, and taxing authorities have always had the authority to raise tax rates as they felt needed to fund their services. The difference is this defines more core services, and it also defines the number of votes it takes to exceed certain amounts. Used to only take 3, now in our case it takes 4. Want to go more than 10% over last year? Got to be unanimous. One more, then I'm going back over there.
Maybe my light bulb's going off, but I've been confused by the Brevard County below the cap, the 3% cap. Is that to save our homes?
No.
Different.
Yep.
You don't have to answer whether it's related to.
Oh, I can answer that.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's talking about the, so we are a home rule county. Does everybody know what that is? It means we have a charter. We're a charter county. So When you're a charter county, here's what you can do. You can make procedures more restrictive than what the state allows, but you cannot negate what the state requirements are. So in our case, the example I used, the state says you can increase your tax rate and your revenues by 10% if you have 4 votes to do that. Okay. Home rule, the charter says you can only increase your tax rate that would realize you 3% more than the previous revenues, or CPI, whichever is less. This doesn't negate having a tax cap. Okay? We still have a tax cap. For you attorneys in the room, for you officers of the court, you can explain that, because I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to go there, but I will tell you it doesn't negate. Nor does the state care about our home rule charter cap. They don't care about that. That's up to you people. You voted yourselves out. You have a charter. If you don't like it, change your charter. But the state doesn't care about that. Property owners care about that. Taxpayers care about that on the tax impact. And there also are provisions to exceed the cap with certain restrictions. For instance, our county has done that twice, and it requires they have to adopt critical needs to determine what is going to be funded when they exceed the cap. And there's lots of opinions on that, and I have my own. I'm not sharing it with you. I can tell you as a property owner, I have a strong opinion on that. Okay? I also have a strong opinion on not taking care of the things that are determined to be core services. And I will tell you that I came to this meeting a little salty today because on Friday I had to close my Melbourne branch because the air conditioning has not worked in that building for months. And my employees have been working in a building trying to keep the temperature in there under 80, and it's not appropriate. And it's been going on for a long time. And I think that is core and fundamental. And when I drop those trim notices on you on Tuesday, I promise you some of you are going to be showing up. A lot of people that use the Sarno location, and I can't have 50 people throughout the day coming through there with temperatures of 83 and 84. So I am not happy about that. County commissioners know I'm not happy about that. I've opined on whether or not I think that infrastructure and facilities are a core service and should be maintained appropriately. We know as homeowners, as business owners, we can't just let our homes go. We can't build it and never maintain it, right? Because this is what happens. So now in the busiest time of the year for me, I'm not going to be able to provide you in-office services in the Melbourne location, and I'm not happy about it. It is inappropriate, and it is not acceptable.
Piggybacking on that, so the county commission determines what our core services are, or does the legislature?
That's a $64,000 question. Right now, the legislature has defined categories of those core services, but remember, there's that one sentence that says, and the other core services defined by the taxing authorities. So does it appear that taxing authorities will still have some discretion? Yes, it appears so. There's going to be an implementing bill, and I promise you this is going to be debated. Okay? I think there's some things that we can all agree that are probably not going to be core services. Parks and recreation, probably not going to be deemed to be core services. Doesn't mean that Brevard County won't fund them. We actually are a county that has a voted millage for recreation. We voted ourselves that tax, right? Just like the environmental endangered lands. We voted ourselves those voted millages. So it'll be interesting to see how the bill handles those, because I don't believe, you're making me go out on officers of the court again, okay? It's gonna file a bar complaint that I'm up here practicing law. It's gonna be interesting to see how this is handled when you have the voters that have already decided a particular levy. I don't believe that's going to be trumped. But I'm not in the legislature, and I'm also not an attorney.
I'd vote for you for the legislature.
Never gonna happen.
As a
I will take that as a compliment.
As a person whose numbers are not my friend, you have made this very clear, and I
Well,
thank you for that.
Thank you, thank you.
Oh, and while I have the floor, can I ask her a question?
Yes, ma'am.
When you appraise a house, so it either goes up or down, how do you do that for a condo building? Now we have these laws that we have to do certain things to our buildings to keep them improved and up to date and safe. If we make those adjustments or those changes, does that increase the value of our property? And are we supposed to let you know, or does somebody come around and let them tell us?
You tell us, because if you're doing any major changes structurally, it requires a permit. And so you pull out a permit, you build it and I come because I get a copy of that permit. So that takes care of itself. In terms of the value, it works the same way. It's a different ownership. You know, you own air rights when you own condominiums. It's actually air rights that you own. It works a lot like fee simple, and the valuation, the approaches to value never change, whether we're talking about industrial, commercial, condominium, or whatever. But it is a different type of ownership, and we look to the market. Okay? We're looking to see what you're transacting those units for, whether or not they have appendages, whether or not you included the dock and the garage with that sale. You know, we're looking at the transactions for those and the legal descriptions of the transfers, but the same way.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I have kind of a twofold question.
Okay.
My understanding, and I could be incorrect, is that school tax represents about 60% of the bill. Is that wrong?
You know, a little less than half. A little less
A little
than half.
less than half, okay. So if the other things like the police, the fire, libraries, whatever, if they're getting reduced, if those amounts are being reduced because now bills are being reduced, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but where is the money gonna come from that they were getting? And you can't answer that.
What she asked is, what are the ideas for revenue replacements for any revenue lost? When you find a member of the legislature that will answer that question for you, you give me a call. 514-3176. It's easy to find my cell number.
I've heard a lot of interesting commentary, both negative and positive. And some of the negative is that there's gonna be a reduction, so you're gonna get a bill from your police department or your fire department. So if that were to be the case, what is the advantage of this?
Yeah.
Well, I can sort of answer your question in that we can't just give you a bill, okay? Levies are very structured and very defined by law. So, for instance, you're classified as an ad valorem tax above the line, or you're classified as a non-ad valorem assessment fee, user fee, those types of things. You have to legally meet requirements to meet one of those. There are counties that have fire districts, okay? But a fire district can't just appear on your tax bill without a fire district being created and that going through the process of fire districts. I don't know what the appetite of the legislature is on creating new fire districts, but it seems like they're not real interested in a bunch of new taxes.
Okay, but having said what I said and hearing your answer, it's kind of hard, not knowing how this is all gonna play out, to vote for this.
I agree. I agree. It is very, the ambiguous part of this is that it requires you to have some sense of what the reaction of taxing authorities is going to be if it were to pass. It requires you to do that. Now, I could give you arguments for that thought, not the amendment. I could give you arguments for and against that thought because you've had to do it before. Remember, we doubled our homestead exemption. It was 25. We doubled it to 50. And we had to make changes as a result of that. Okay? So Do I believe that, yes, if this were to pass, there's gonna have to be some reprioritization, but it might require some transformative thinking.
And will services be reduced?
And will services be reduced? Will my trash pickup as a result be one of them? I live in Wendover, trash comes twice a week. I have a 96-gallon can. I never have it down 2 times a week, ever. But I pay for that because somebody decided that 2 times a week, enough to a 96-gallon can. Now, I don't have 5 children that live at home, okay? So maybe this young lady's 96-gallon can is being picked up. So, you know, do I think there'd have to be give and take on both sides of the equation? Possibly. It may end up that taxing authorities have to tighten their belt, and there are some services that would be affected, but it also may require some reprioritization on how money is spent. And that's just, you know, I wish I could give you more, but there's no way for me to do that.
Well, from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like there's definitive information. Completely definitive.
Yeah, the definitive part that you don't have is what the reaction of the taxing authorities are going to be. You know, same as when we doubled the homestead exemption. You know, you didn't know if you agreed to double the homestead exemption, what the reaction of the taxing authorities was going to be.
Plus going from 50 to 150 is very large.
It is.
They could have gone to 75 or 100.
Now, again, I'm not opining on this, I'm just giving you facts, okay? What was the average value of a home when homestead went from 5,000 to 25,000? It was not $100,000. So, again, not trying to get tricky, just, you know, a lot to consider here.
Yeah, there is.
All right. Yes, ma'am, you've been so patient, I'm sorry.
No problem. There are 13 cities or townships, I think, in Brevard County.
16, you're almost right.
Okay. My understanding is some of these very small, you know, like Grand Oak area, maybe NIM, some of the very small, they don't really have this reserve money available, because when we say, oh, we'll cut your, you know, budgets and that, they don't have it. So their fire, their police, their libraries, where are they supposed to come up with this money? And I don't know if you have the answer to that, but.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I just think again, this amendment, like you're saying, there's too many things that have not been included or haven't been explained. So when you think of where these communities are supposed to come up with this money, I think that's what we have to look at also.
One thing I will say is that there is such a thing as fiscally constrained counties. Does anybody know that? Yes. Some of you. So we have very small counties, particularly like up in the Panhandle. They are fiscally constrained counties. Those counties get grants from the state to subsidize their budgets. So it may be that the same thing would have to happen. I don't know that, but it may be that the same thing would have to happen. And they have talked about the fiscally constrained counties and what they might have to do for those. On a county our size, you know, we've got different revenues that a Suwannee and a Liberty County don't have, okay? They're not going to Suwannee and Liberty County to watch a heavy lift, right? Watch a rocket. They're not coming to get on a cruise ship, and they're not going to Liberty County. I don't know, maybe they go canoeing in Liberty. I don't want to dog on Liberty County. But you know, we're just much different. You know, we're the 10th largest county in the state of Florida, and you know, the only one with a spaceport. So we are very unique. We got river to river, river to ocean property, you know, 72 miles of beaches. Just the composition of our county is much different. But fiscally constrained counties, yes, the legislature is going to have to respond to those. So it might be that they get some type of allocation in their budgets from the state rather than all of their money coming from local property tax revenue. But again, that is supposition on my part. Yes,
So-
ma'am.
So I come from a state where 20 years ago, they put a cap on 2.5% higher on your taxes. And we had snow plowing at that time. That was cut down. Our streets weren't cleaned, our sidewalks weren't taken care of. We lost so much out of our public schools, it was ridiculous, because our police, our firefighters, our teachers, all had contracts, they had to be paid. It makes such a difference in a community when the community does not support the community. Because I've seen it, and it took years to bring us back to what we were. Because people thought, oh, this is great, especially people who don't have children in a school system.
Believe me, that's the number one question I get. when
I know.
The term notices go out.
I didn't realize that it wasn't gonna affect the schools.
Right.
Which, even though I don't have children in the school system, and never have in Florida, I still support educating our children. But I think we're gonna see maybe having to go to a dump with our rubbish, because we're not gonna be able to have pickups. It's gonna be an impact on every person that lives in this county, I believe. It might settle out after a few years, but it's gonna be a while. We're spoiled.
So I'm gonna pull the positive out of that. You were there and you found here, and now you're here. And we love it that you're here.
Yeah, me too. I moved from Mass.
Yeah, yep.
Massachusetts, yeah.
About 2.5.
Yeah, 2.5.
So-
Took my kids out of public school.
There are lots of different variations of the property tax equation all through our country. Many states do it much differently than we do. And some states have a level of assessment of like 40%, and they only reappraise every 5 years. There's all different models out there. And this one does get very confusing. Before I used hair color every 8 weeks, we had one homestead exemption. It was $25,000. Everybody saved about $500. Your tax bills were very easy to understand. We don't live in that world anymore, right? Our property tax structure has changed tremendously. So I hear what you're saying. Anytime you make a major change to a tax structure, there has to be a response to that. Now, some folks, again, just what some folks are saying, is that, that's okay. We got a lot of people visiting the state of Florida, and it would be nice if a lot of those visitors that come that are using our roadways and our bridges and our infrastructure and staying here and driving on our roads and getting on our cruise ships paid more when they are here to subsidize so property owners don't have to. That is a school of thought, not Dana's school of thought, a school of thought that has been mentioned in the legislature when a lot of these joint resolutions were being presented. So there are some different ideas about revenue replacements that aren't actually in the pockets of property owners that might make up some of this revenue. Now, I will never be in the legislature. Those that are going to have to think about that if this were to pass.
This lady's been asking.
Yes, ma'am.
A while ago, you said that you provided an estimate of the effects of the taxable value,
Yes.
on taxable value. So that's gonna be the starting point for all of these entities that you sent this estimate to say, well, okay, this is my estimate as to how this could affect them.
It is an estimate of what the taxable value difference would be if this amendment were in place for 2026 and 2027, meaning if we had the first 150 for those property owners that qualified for that, at that tax rate, what their impact would be on the taxable value, not the revenue side, because that would infer, only what I did was what the revenue would be and what the value would be if this passed with today as it is today, with the tax rate it is today. That's the best that I could do. So yes, I did do that. That was something I could do. That was straight math with an existing tax rate, with an existing proposed exemption amount. So yes, I supplied that to all of the taxing districts.
Is that public information?
Sure, it's just a spreadsheet. I can have Damien email it to LWB and she can share it if you want, or you can email us and we're happy to send it to you.
It just seems to me that it's not clear from the amendment how it's actually going to affect us. We're just guessing that.
The only thing that is clear for the property appraiser to tell you is exactly how it would affect you as a property owner in terms of your taxable value. There's no way for me to tell you what the reaction to the taxing authorities are going to be with changes in service, changes in revenue streams, adopting a higher sales tax. There's no way for me to do that. And to tell you that I have the idea of what they're going to do would be disingenuous, because I really don't know. I really don't know. I will tell you this. 6 is a big number. 60% is a big number. If this were 50%, I would tell you that I would bet you a Coca-Cola with crushed ice that it would pass.
Yeah.
But 60% is a big number. And with a lot of the ambiguity and a lot of the change in philosophy from the governor, I don't know. I don't know. I will tell you this, people are hurting, you know that. You go to the gas pump, you go to the grocery store, you pay your homeowner's insurance, or you don't have homeowner's insurance because you can't afford it anymore. These are all the things that voters are taking to the polls with them and will take with them in November. So, you know, there's no way for me to quantify and qualify where that's going to be in the voters' minds in terms of priority when they check yes or check no.
Yeah. You know, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
This is so complex. How much of this does the general voter understand?
That's why we have this. We're trying to figure it out.
Her question was,
But I'm not sure I understood everything you were talking about.
did it sound good? That's all.
It sounded wonderful. I have a husband who will explain it to me tonight.
Well, then you should
But in
keep him
general,
around.
how many people really understand what's going on?
The question, how many people really understand this or what's going around? Honestly, ma'am, probably the same number of people that totally understand the Florida property tax structure as it exists today, and the same number of people that show up at budget meetings for the county and for municipalities. Not a lot. And I don't fault property owners or taxpayers for that. We work, we raise children, we shop, we clean our undergarments. We do things that we have to do that, you know, we live, and this is difficult. And, you know, not everybody has a job that makes it consistent for them to show up or have the resources or even skill set, you know, to dive into a $2 billion budget to determine if some of the things that we're spending money on are appropriate. And so what do? We elect folks like myself, and we hope that we are electing people that are skilled, that understand, but also listen to the people that put them in those seats. And that is important. It is not enough to just vote for us and put us there. You need to hold us accountable. You need to ask us questions. You need to make sure you understand why you're paying for what and what it's going to. Okay? You put those people in their seats. They all have offices. You can make appointments with them when it is convenient for you to get a lot of these questions answered. And don't be afraid to do it. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
You know that on the ballot, it's going to be straightforward or confusing, like so many amendments are.
You're a member of the League of Women Voters, right? Is any attorney ever going to write a constitutional amendment so we understand it, and is it going to be straightforward?
No.
I am confident that of all of the times that I have voted in my adult life, that has never been the case. Sometimes it's hard to do that, I understand, because there are legal nuances and requirements to any time we change our Constitution. Now, I'm going to make an opinion here. This is only Dana Blickley's opinion, not the property appraiser, just Dana's. I am very sensitive to changing my Constitution. I'm very sensitive to it. Okay? Not that there haven't been constitutional changes, amendments that have been wonderful for our Constitution. But I'm very, very critical as a voter, as a person, when we are putting things on our ballots to change our Constitution. Because it is not so easy to unring that bell. Right? It is not so easy. We can vote people in and vote people out to make changes in laws with the legislature. Not so easy to do with the Constitution. Anytime we want to change it, it still requires that 60%.
Vote
Hold on one second.
411.
I'll come back to you. Hold on.
Vote 411 will help you
Okay.
determine the amendment.
Yes, ma'am.
Mosquito control,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm concerned. I don't want to see any money taken away from that.
Ma'am, I live in Wendover Farms. I am equally concerned.
It's in Mosquito County, we don't want to go back there.
Yes, yes. And, you know, a lot of people have talked about that, particularly, you know, Mosquito Lagoon, it was Mosquito County, you're right about that. You know, that might be something that Brevard County may be defined as public safety.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we just don't know. I would be an advocate of that, I can tell you. And it's very, very important. We know that mosquitoes carry diseases and can cause all kinds of issues for us, for our animals, for our ability to enjoy our property. So we may find, I don't know, we may find that that might fall into a public safety category. I don't think the park's going to get there, but I think that mosquitoes might. Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned that a lot of this is going to depend on how the taxing authority reacts to the change if this amendment passes. The county manager last week to the county commission prepared a list of impacts on the budget. And one I remember is the library, and it represented about 20% of the library's budget if this amendment passes. Can you speak to his other figures, please?
I can't.
Okay.
Not because I agree or disagree with them, but I don't have the math behind the figures that he gave. So when he says, you know, 20% for libraries or 17%, I don't have the information that he's using to determine that percentage. Yeah, I'm sorry. Great question for him.
Mm-hmm.
All right, hold on. I'll come back to you, but I want to make sure that nobody else has.
I have a question. The League of Living Voters makes an effort on this site to explain what all of these, all the material that's being discussed on the elections. How are we going to be explaining in language that people could understand what this is like? I'm really serious.
It's already up. The amendments are already up on Vote 411.
Yeah.
It will tell you what your yes vote will mean and what a no vote will mean.
Okay, so that's.
So I
But
highly
bet you it's
recommend
hard.
trying the website on issues that you're kind of not understanding.
But I'm sure it was hard to do that.
It's very hard to do that.
Is it clear on the website, or is there?
Yes, it's very.
It's not in
Well, it is
there.
getting rewritten. It is getting rewritten.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
this gentleman said it's being rewritten. The information on the website is being rewritten?
No,
No, the amendment is being rewritten.
Okay.
The Attorney General was ordered to
The-
rewrite it and make it less of political stuff.
I don't ever disagree with a voter publicly, so I'm just gonna augment your statement. How's that?
Depends on how you augment.
Okay. So the amendment itself has not been rewritten. What the Attorney General has rewritten is the title and the summary. The title and the summary of the amendment for ballot purposes is what was the lawsuit, the order imposed of the judge that ruled on that. So doesn't change the amendment. It changes the ballot language of the title of the amendment and the summary.
Going back to what people are going to read and say yes or no to. I agree with you. The
Correct.
amendment itself is the same. What the information that the average voter is going to, if they don't do any research, they're going to see that for the first time.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
And
He
if it
said what?
sounds too good to be true, then it's probably.
If it sounds too good to be true, maybe.
it is.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree with you that 60% is a large number.
Yes.
However, I've read a lot of commentary, and I think there will probably be a lot of people that will not be informed, and they're gonna walk in with their ballot and say, oh, I'm getting a reduction. sign me
Oh,
up.
yeah.
Yeah, her comment was, she's afraid a lot of people are gonna walk in and see, yes, this is a reduction in taxes for me, and just vote yes on it, without any additional research. Not only would I agree with you on that statement, I would agree that that's probably the case that voters take on many amendments.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily because we're lazy voters, but because they're hard to understand. Many times constitutional amendments are very hard to understand, especially when there's double negatives. You know, or something in there that you wonder why it was written that way. I'm not an English major, but I understand a double negative.
And they're fake.
Get points off for double negatives.
Another thing I heard, I'm sorry, did someone else have their hand up?
You're it.
Okay.
The rest of them are done with me.
You know, those that rent know how high rent already is. And if this goes through, the property owner will end up having a raised value, or would it affect renters? I mean, in the long run, they could raise their rent, is what I'm getting at, because of taxing.
Well, actually, again, I don't disagree with the public, publicly. What is spoken most about is the opposite. What is spoken most about and asked in terms of a rhetorical question is, if property owners that own income-producing property have a reduced tax bill, are they going to pass that savings on to the renter?
Wow.
Okay. That's the question that I field most of the time. Okay, and you know there's no way for me to answer that. Okay? But I'll just say it this way. If you own a home and you have a renter and you put an impact door on it and your homeowner's insurance gets reduced 12%, do you reduce the rent?
No.
Now you're in business.
St. Peter might be there when you get there and say, I want to talk to you about that. Yeah. You know, we're left to the honor system for a lot of things in life. Right? And a property owner has a right in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution, in the statutes, in the federal Constitution. Property owners have rights, and they have the right to ask market rent, under market rent, over market rent, and we have the right to pay it or reject it. So you have to live like I have to live with every decision that we make. All elections have consequences. That's why we're talking today. So, you know, do I believe that most of these savings, whether we're talking about this one, whether we're talking about a savings on the example that I gave on homeowners insurance, are those passed on to the renter? Probably not most of the time, because you have a lease and it says you're going to pay X amount of money for 12 months. And when you renegotiate, I don't know if you've ever rented, but how many of you have rented and when you renegotiated your lease it went down? That's probably a universal response, no matter what room we're in. Yes, ma'am.
You used the word implementation earlier, and what you mean by that is after, if this bill passes, then it's going to get implemented in some way.
Correct.
But we don't know what it really means.
I would imagine if it passes, there'll be lots of lawsuits and lots of legislation on implementation. What are core services? How are those defined? Define residential requirements to prove residency. What types of documentation are appropriate? Is the legislature and the state going to accept to prove you're a Florida resident? Which ones are not? What happens if you are a student and you've been living abroad, but your parents are still paying for your graduate degree, but your residency documents for school purposes are all in Florida except for your driver's license so you could drive when you're in Europe? You know, I don't know. There's lots of that kind of stuff that's going to have to be determined.
So if there's lawsuits and a lot of fighting about it, does it go forward?
Oh, yes, ma'am. It goes forward. Yeah, it goes forward. Pretty much well, and I don't know if you're heavily involved in the legislative, I know that you guys keep your eye on the ball all the time in legislation, but there's another part to legislation almost always, and if you run in Tallahassee, and it is my least favorite place to be, you know that a lot of times we have what we call cleanup bills, cleanup. So, you know, we have unintended consequences of sometimes very good bills, but when we were debating the bill and, you know, in the House and in the Senate, we didn't think, we didn't think about this. And then there'll be a cleanup bill or an implementation bill that will come that will clean that part up. If this passes, it absolutely will have that piece. Yeah, because it requires it, implementation bill. Yeah.
Well, I understand that when this all started, it started out one way and there were lots of iterations before it got to this point.
Correct. Correct. Started out with the governor saying we shouldn't pay property taxes. You own your home, you shouldn't have to pay the government for your home again. That's where we started. And there's two schools of thought on that. One is that, why should I have to pay for my home over and over when I paid for 30 years on it? I've been paying property taxes for all these years. Why should I have to continue to pay the government for my home? The other school of thought is, well, you're not actually paying for your home again. You're just paying for all the services that you either demand or wish to have. The problem is that we haven't all been equally yoked. So if you watched the sponsors of these bills in the House, and I'm not paraphrasing, I'm saying, one of the sponsors stood up and said, in Miami-Dade, we have county commissioners that ride around in $100,000 SUVs, and they have Uber drivers that are taxpayer funded that pay them to go from point A to point B. Now, I have to take him on his word, that's a true statement, and the taxpayers down there are funding that. Okay, do I think that's appropriate? No. I would be very much involved as a citizen if that were going on where I live, but evidently it's going on there. So there are, unfortunately, fraud, waste, and abuse that exists in every facet of government. We know that. We know that as citizens. And we have to ferret that out as much as we can. And we have to keep our eye on the ball. We have to remove people from office sometimes. Sometimes the law removes them from office in handcuffs. Sometimes we vote them out of office, but you know, unfortunately, there will always be fraud, waste, and abuse. The whole idea is that we have the least amount of that as possible on the backs of our citizens. So unfortunately, there's been some bad actors out there with property taxes. Absolutely, certainly. We've had it in our own county, okay? Had it in the property appraiser's office. Chief deputy was walked out in handcuffs. Not my chief deputy, but it happens, and it's unfortunate. And you know, it's paying for the sins of others sometimes. And we'll just have to. You'll go into the voting booth, and you'll vote what you feel is appropriate. And we in these seats will have to respond to it accordingly and be accountable for that.
It just seems surprising that this is such a large amount. I find that a little bit strange, that it's going to 150 and then 250. That's a large increase. That's a big jump.
I think the idea behind that, if I remember, and again, we're going on my 58-year-old memory, there it is, there's the number, that a lot of members of the legislature, and call your representatives and ask them. Monique Miller was the sponsor of the House Joint bill that actually made it through, you know, one of the ones that made it through the House side. Actually, what the Senate took up is, you know, a different version. But in that, now I lost my train of thought because I'm 58. What did you ask?
Because it was a big jump.
That was a big jump, yes. What they talked about was, well, yes, it's a big jump, but it's proportional to what homestead traditionally was and what value was at that time. Okay, so back in the day when the homestead exemption went from $5,000 to $25,000, you know, the average taxable value or market value back then was like $60,000.
Yeah.
You know, so $25,000 on $60,000, and we survived it. Okay, we survived it. I'm not promoting this. I'm just saying we survived that. I'm sure there had to be some prioritization there. I was young when that happened. So the same would be here if it was to pass. So, but I think that's the thinking on the amounts. That's a guess on my part. I'm getting gonged though.
Thank you so much, Ms. Well, we hope, the league hopes that you've got some greater understanding about Amendment 3, and probably you still have questions like I do. I would go to vote 411. I keep saying it. It will share with you what a yes and a no vote would mean. They kind of translate the legalese for you. Give it a try. And there are 3 amendments up. But Amendment 3 is the most talked about one. But there are a couple others that are translated as well on that site. And remember, it's a nonpartisan site. So thank you so much.